Well, good evening. It's lovely to see you all. So as Dan mentioned, I'm going to be talking on We All Have Our Part to Play, and it's following the series of Unleashing the Church to Bring Life to the City. I've put up a picture of Causeway Coast, which Paul mentioned last week, and a lot of you put your hands up to say that you've been there. I've not actually been there, but I've been to the vineyard just down the road, and that was in 2015. And it was really inspiring to see their church, and they really live out this vision of wanting to reach out to their community in an authentic way. This book, Scattered Servants, was written by Alan Scott, who was senior pastor at the Causeway Coast Vineyard for a long time. So I'm going to be sharing bits from that book. So they have a real heart as a church to seek to help people to join in with what God is doing in their community. And they wanted to create a pathway that would help them become people who lived with the whole world in their hearts and not just the church world. They knew that most believers want to bring life but don't know how to do it. So they used a passage in John chapter 4 to create a pathway to empower people to do this. So I'm going to outline that pathway today. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, it's a bit bigger. So it starts with initiating contact with non-Christians, involving unbelievers in your life, talking about everyone has hidden hurts, and finally inviting them to a place of encounter with prayer running alongside the whole thing. So it's a kind of model in the book, which I've put into a diagram form just to make it a little bit easier to see. And I'll talk through each step and have a bit of a time of thinking how we do it at the end. I'm going to read the woman at the well story from the Bible, which is in John chapter 4, verses 1 to 30. I've skipped a few little bits in it because it's quite a long passage. But if you want to read it in full, do feel free to read it later on at home. It's in the Message version. So Jesus left the Judean countryside and went back to Galilee. To get there, he had to pass through Samaria. He came into Sychar, a Samaritan village that bordered the field Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was still there. Jesus, worn out by the trip, sat down by the well. It was noon. A woman, a Samaritan, came to draw water. Jesus said, "Would you give me a drink of water?" His disciples had gone into the village to buy food and drink. The Samaritan woman, taken aback, asked, "How come you, a Jew, are asking me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink?" Jews in those days wouldn't be caught dead talking to the Samaritans. Jesus answered, "If you knew the generosity of God and who I am, you wouldn't be asking me for a drink. You would be asking me for a drink, and I would give you fresh living water." The woman said, "Sir, you don't even have a bucket to draw with, and this well is deep. So how are you going to get this living water?" Jesus said, "Everyone who drinks this water will get thirsty again and again. Anyone who drinks the water I give will never thirst, not ever." The woman said, "Sir, give me this water so I won't ever get thirsty, and I won't ever have to come back to this well again." He said, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she said. "That's nicely put. I have no husband. You've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now isn't even your husband." You spoke the truth there, sure enough. "Oh, so you're a prophet. Well, tell me this. Our ancestors worshipped God at this mountain, but you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place for worship, right? Believe me, the time is coming when you Samaritans will worship the God neither here nor at this mountain, nor there in Jerusalem. The time is coming, in fact has come, when what you're called will not matter, and where you go to worship will not matter." The woman said, "I don't know about that, but I do know that the Messiah is coming. When he arrives, we'll get the whole story." "I am he," said Jesus. "You don't have to wait any longer or look any further." Just then his disciples came back. The woman left and went back to the village. She said, "Come see a man who knew all about the things I did. He knows me inside out. Do you think this could be the Messiah?" And they went out to see for themselves. So I've got a map of the area at the time. It's a wee bit different to nowadays. So you've got Judea down in the south and Galilee up in the north, and that was Jesus' journey with the disciples. And you can see the little dot with Sychar on, which is the village where they stopped. And in this story, Jesus goes via Samaria, and when he gets there, he stops at a well, and he's tired out. It's hot, it's noon, middle of the day, and he needs a drink. I don't know about you, but when I'm hot and tired, I'm not in a place to think about other people, really. I just want to go and rest and do whatever. But this is quite challenging stuff. Jesus ends up stopping for this lady, taking the time to chat to her, and this encounter changes her life and potentially the whole village. In Matthew 16, verse 24, it says, "If we want to follow Jesus, we need to deny ourselves and take up our cross." In other words, pursuing God is a call to lay down our life to bring life to others. God is calling us to be God-centered within our day, and it may mean going out of our day, disrupting our normal patterns of life or discomfort in order to prioritize bringing life to others. Involving unbelievers in your life. So many of you will probably do this really naturally. You'll probably have a lot of friends and family that don't know God. I was brought up in a Christian family. From a young age, I was in church, every service going. I went to a youth group as a teenager, and at school I had a couple of friends that were Christians and a couple of friends that weren't. But we invited the girls to our Christian events. They became Christians, and then all my friends were Christians, so I didn't really have any non-Christian friends. I used to go on missions, and we'd do outreach, but the people that I was working with on the team were Christians, and I tended to build up better relationships with them than I did the people that we were outreaching to. And so I think quite often, if you're anything like me, you can get caught up in church world, like they were describing at the beginning, having a church world in your heart rather than the world in your heart. And I think what God is asking for us is to try and build a community where we can authentically share of ourselves with the good and the bad of what God is doing in our lives with people in church and out of church. And it's finding a way to integrate the two together. There's a guy called Shane Claiborne, who's an American social activist, and he talks about the poverty of the West being loneliness. People want community. A while back, I listened to some podcasts by a guy called Michael Frost. He's an Australian who's taken a lead in missional church movements. He talks about people have a second space in their life. So your first space is your place of productivity, so it might be work, or if you study, it's your studies. It could be doing your housework or looking after somebody. And that's the place that you are because you have to be, more or less. Your second space is where you go to enjoy yourself, relax, your hobbies. And he said this is a great place to go out and be meeting people, and a way of encountering unbelievers and building community in a natural way. And part of his ethos is about eating once a week intentionally with people who aren't Christians. As the book, The Scattered Servant, says, the Bible doesn't tell us to do evangelism, but it does model bringing life to others. And I'm sure there's lots of examples in the church where this already happens. So you were saying about your parent and whatever group it was, dads and kids. But I think that there'll be others of us here that have things that are our second space that would be a great way of integrating people who know God and who don't know God and building a community that way. Okay, so invest through fasting and praying. I put this as an arrow running through the whole of the pathway because I think it's so important. I think prayer needs to be at the root of everything. And Alan Scott suggests that as Jesus approached the woman, he was praying for her. And even though it doesn't specifically say it in the passage, we know that Jesus often went away by himself to chat with God. And actually, he was in step with what God was doing all the way and knew his will because of that time that he spent with God. And so for us, it's really important to keep that line with God and communication so that we know what he's wanting us to do. Also, in the book, they describe how initially nobody was coming to faith, and they made an announcement at church to say, we are committed to seeing 100 people come to God this year. And I think people's jaws dropped to the floor, but they started praying for people that they'd shared about Jesus with, and within days, the first person came to know Jesus for themselves, and within a year, there was 104 people that said yes to Jesus. So prayer makes a difference. Everyone has hidden hurts. So Rick Warren, an American pastor, said, I believe that anybody can be won to Christ if you discover the key to his or her heart. So Jesus was able to speak to this lady's hidden hurt, and this was the key to her opening up to him and then recognizing Jesus for who he really is. Liam and I, my boyfriend, decided we might try this out a little bit, and we went up to a homeless guy on the street and offered to pray for him. Well, we initially offered him food and drink because that's what he was asking for, and then while Liam prayed, I thought, right, I'm gonna pray for his hidden hurt. I'm gonna ask Jesus to reveal the key to his heart. And I heard nothing. I got absolutely nothing. So we finished off. We had a good chat to him anyway, and then left him to it. And I felt like God say, actually, don't worry too much about the formula. Don't get too caught up. There'll be times when this is like, I'm going to speak into someone's life in an amazing, life-changing way, but don't be afraid to give it a go and just be open and obedient to his promptings. I thought it was also important to remember that we have more than water to give. So in this story, they're talking about practical things initially, water for thirst. But Jesus then flips it around to say, I've got life-giving water for you. And we have authority to bring God's kingdom, and that includes good news for the poor. It includes freedom for captives, sight for the blind, release from oppression, and the year of God's favour. And to be honest, who doesn't want that? We've got things that we can bring to people's lives that they can't get from anywhere else. So the final step on the pathway is invite people to a place of encounter. So at the end of the story, moving to verses 38 to 42, we see that the woman brings the other people in the village to Jesus, and they end up entrusting him because they hear what he has to say. And it says, they said to the woman, we're no longer taking this on your say-so. We've heard it for ourselves, and we know for sure he's the saviour of the world. There's a study that shows that 25% of people will come to church if a friend invited them. So if you invite 10, 2.5 of them are going to say yes. Paul was sharing last week as well about the boy that he invited to summer camp who kept saying no. And in the end, he said yes. And after 20 minutes of silence, he encountered God. I felt it's really important to say, if you're someone like me, that if someone says no to you, you never ask again. Don't be afraid to keep asking. Don't be afraid to be persistent. I also wanted to say tonight that if there is anyone here that hasn't experienced this life-giving water for themselves, this life that Jesus offers, and you'd like to find out more, don't miss this chance. Just chat to anyone that you've come with, or if you don't know anyone and you want someone to chat with, there's a space over there with some chairs that people will come and find you and chat and pray with you if that's something you'd be interested in. Okay, so I think the pathway is application in itself, But there were a few questions that kind of popped out to me that I thought I would ask you to think about for this week. So first of all, if you're somebody who maybe doesn't have the heart or the world or the city in your heart, then ask God for it. I've found that as I've been part of the 24/7 prayer room and we've been praying for the city, God has been breaking my heart more for the city and for the people in it. Are you someone that's busy, tired out? Are you able to hear what God's saying within your day? One of the questions we can be asking ourselves or asking God is, what do you have for me today? And trying to prioritize that over your schedule. Are you somebody who has an incredible talent or hobby or something that you really enjoy doing, that second space that could be used to provide a place for meeting between people who do know Jesus and people who don't know Jesus, where you can do life together in an authentic way? I think this one is for all of us. We can all pray. If nothing else, we can all pray and fast for people to encounter God. We'll all know somebody that doesn't know Jesus. So that's a challenge to do. Alan Scott says in his book, if you can pray for 2 people every day and ask Jesus to reveal the key to their heart, that will be life-changing. Even if you only pray for 1, that's still significant. And he says just for a short time, to do it for a short time. Give it a go. See what happens. Inviting people to encounter. Dan was saying about Alpha, and there's flyers on the sheet. Is there anyone that you can invite to Alpha? Josh shared that this was a place that he was able to come to when he spoke last week about Alpha. He didn't know God, and it was a safe place to come, but he wouldn't have come into church. And then finally, I had a picture from God of lanterns, Chinese lanterns. And a few weeks ago when Dan spoke, he said about the fact that we're called to be light to the world, and that if you shine your light in a bright room, it's not going to make much difference. And I had an image of these bright red Chinese lantern going out into the dark, and these beautiful glowing bits going out and just lighting up the darkness. And I felt like there'll be some people naturally at the front that are able to lead the way. And I think that some of you here will be people that do this all the time, and this is really natural for you. And for you, it might be about thinking, who can I take on the journey with me? Who can I mentor? Who can I encourage to do this, to step out? And in the picture, the people behind the lead lantern carriers were able to step forward in a more lit up way because of the people in front of them. So have a think, if this is natural to you, how can you help others to be building this into their lives? Okay, so I'm just going to summarise. I believe that God is inviting us to partner with him to bring life to those that we encounter in our day-to-day life and to our city. I want to read a quote from the book, Scattered Servants, that really challenged me. Imagine if 1 of every 4 of your friends started moving closer to God. Imagine what our church would look like if people were ablaze with a passion for God and a passion for the lost. Imagine people turning up early so they could pray for spiritually distant friends and family. Imagine worship where hunger is overwhelming because we need God to come for the sake of his glory and kingdom, because people we love are perishing without God and without hope in the world. Imagine the welcome we give newcomers because of their effort it's taken to get them there. Imagine if we saw young people as the cry of our heart and the cry of heaven. Imagine how eager we'd be to receive God's work because we want to share the bread of life with a dying generation. That's where we're heading, because that's what our vibrant missional community looks like. I just want to finish by saying that Jesus wants to bring life to Southampton and the people that we know. And he wants to do that in and through us, and that we all have a part to play in this. So I just want to ask you, what is your part? Thank you.